Yard sales, those charming neighborhood events where hidden treasures await, each item with a story to tell. But what happens when those stories are darker than you ever imagined? What if, instead of memories, you bring home something sinister? In this video, we uncover 5 chilling true stories that start with innocent yard sale purchases and spiral into disturbing, life-altering nightmares. From an old toolbox hiding a dangerous secret to a rocking chair that seems to move on its own, these tales will make you think twice before picking up a second-hand bargain. Grab your favorite blanket, turn on the lights, and brace yourself, because after hearing these stories, you might never look at a yard sale the same way again. Are you ready to uncover the terrifying truths hidden in plain sight? Our first story begins with a simple, rusty toolbox, a vintage find that seemed perfect for an old-school collection. But what the buyer didn't know was that this toolbox held secrets that would put their life in danger. Next, we'll explore the eerie discovery of an unmarked VHS tape, filled with footage that shouldn't exist. It reveals moments captured long before the buyer moved into their home. Moments that hint at a chilling history. Then we move to a vintage mirror. Its ornate design and aged beauty caught someone's eye at a yard sale, but what followed was a sinister connection to its former owner. A connection that refused to be broken. Our fourth story revolves around an antique rocking chair. It's said that older furniture holds the energy of its past owners, but this chair did much more than hold memories. It seemed to act on them. Finally, we'll end with a haunting realization. Sometimes, the seemingly harmless act of bargain hunting can open doors to nightmares you never asked for. Each of these stories serves as a chilling reminder that the past can haunt the present in ways we might never expect. Let's uncover the horrors one by one. Saturday mornings were my little escape. A break from the monotony of my 9-to-5 life as an insurance agent. That day was no different. I had no grand plans, just a vague notion of exploring the nearby yard sales for something unique. There's a certain charm in sifting through other people's discarded items, imagining the stories they carried. At one of the sales, my eyes fell on a rusty red toolbox sitting inconspicuously on a rickety table. It looked ancient, with chipped paint and hinges that squeaked loudly when I opened it. There was something oddly captivating about it. It wasn't just a toolbox, it was a relic from another time, and for $10 it felt like a steal. The seller, a gaunt man in his 50s, looked relieved when I handed him the money. "Enjoy," he muttered under his breath, though his tone sounded more like a warning than a farewell. I brushed it off, chalking it up to his disinterest in the sale. I was thrilled with my purchase, oblivious to the nightmare that was about to unfold. Back home, I eagerly set the toolbox on my kitchen table. It was heavier than I'd expected, but it only added to the intrigue. As I opened it, the metallic scent of rust mixed with something I couldn't quite place. An earthy, almost musty smell that made me hesitate. Inside were old tools, a hammer, pliers, and a screwdriver, all covered in grease and grime. They were well used, bearing the wear and tear of decades. As I cleaned the tools, I noticed something strange about the base of the toolbox. It sounded hollow when I tapped it. My curiosity took over. I fetched a flathead screwdriver and pried at the edges of the base until, with a loud creak, it popped open to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside was a small, tightly sealed bag of white powder. My stomach sank. It didn't take a detective to know what it was. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it wasn't what I thought. But as I stared at the bag, the reality set in. I'd just stumbled upon someone's hidden stash of drugs. Suddenly, the seller's odd behavior made sense. The sound of the doorbell jolted me from my thoughts. Standing on my porch was a man I'd never seen before, mid-40s, scruffy and jittery. His eyes darted nervously as he asked, "Did you buy a toolbox at the yard sale down the street?" His voice was calm, but there was a tension beneath it that made my skin crawl. "Yes," I replied cautiously. "Why?" "That's mine," he said, his tone growing firmer. "I need it back." Something about his demeanor screamed danger. My gut told me not to trust him, so I lied, saying the toolbox wasn't with me. His face twisted with anger as he stepped closer. "You don't understand what you've done," he hissed before storming off. That night, unease settled over me like a heavy fog. Every sound seemed amplified: the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint rustling of trees outside. I couldn't shake the man's parting words, and the toolbox sat on my counter like a ticking time bomb. At around 3 a.m., a loud crash shattered the silence. My heart leapt into my throat as I grabbed the nearest object, a kitchen knife, and crept downstairs. The front window was smashed, glass scattered across the floor. My first thought was of the toolbox, and sure enough, it was gone. The police arrived within minutes after my panicked call. I explained everything: the yard sale, the hidden drugs, the strange man, but without concrete evidence or a suspect, there wasn't much they could do. They advised me to stay vigilant and left, but their words offered little comfort. The nightmare escalated the next day. The same man from before appeared again, this time standing across the street, staring at my house. He didn't approach or say anything, just watched. That evening, the banging started. It wasn't subtle. It was loud and frantic, as if someone was trying to break the door down. From the other side, his voice rang out, angry and desperate. "Where is it? Where's the stash?" Terrified, I yelled through the door that it was gone, but he didn't believe me. "You think I'm stupid?" he screamed. His words were laced with venom, and I could hear the frustration boiling over. I called the police again, but by the time they arrived, the man had vanished. It wasn't until days later that I learned the truth. This man had been using yard sales as a cover to stash drugs in everyday items, retrieving them later. The seller of the toolbox had unknowingly passed this dangerous burden on to me. The police eventually tracked him down and arrested him, but the damage was done. My home, once a place of safety, now felt like a prison. Every creak in the night made me jump. Every shadow felt like a lurking threat. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even long after the ordeal was over. That rusty old toolbox, with its nostalgic charm, had become a symbol of danger and chaos. I learned the hard way that some items carry more than just history. They carry secrets, and not all secrets are meant to be uncovered. At first, it didn't even seem worth picking up. A dusty, unmarked VHS tape lying in a box labeled free at the edge of a yard sale. But there was something oddly compelling about it. Unlike the other tapes in the box, this one was unblemished, its casing free of the usual stickers or handwritten labels. It felt out of place. The elderly woman running the sale seemed indifferent when I held it up. "Oh, that? I don't even know where it came from," she said with a vague wave of her hand. "Probably left here by accident. You can have it." Her casual dismissal should have been a warning, but curiosity got the better of me. What secrets could an old, unmarked VHS tape possibly hold? I tucked it into my bag and headed home, my imagination already running wild. Later that evening, as rain pattered against my windows, I decided to satisfy my curiosity. I rummaged through the closet to find my ancient VCR, a relic I hadn't touched in years. Setting it up in the living room, I slid the tape into the machine and pressed play, bracing myself for either static or some random snippet of an old TV show. The screen flickered to life, displaying the unmistakable shakiness of home video footage. My heart sank as I recognized the room being filmed. It was my living room. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Perhaps the house had a twin somewhere. But as the camera panned across the room, every detail was identical. The distinctive brick pattern of the fireplace, the creaky floorboards that groaned beneath my feet, even the small crack in the corner of the window. This wasn't just a similar room. This was my living room. The footage showed a family, a father, a mother, and 2 kids, seated on a couch that now occupied the very space where mine stood. They were exchanging gifts, laughing, and speaking to one another, though the audio was muted. But something was wrong. Their movements were jerky, almost like they were being pulled on strings. The mother's face was unnervingly blank, her eyes wide and glassy, her smile too rigid. The father glanced at the camera occasionally, his expression flickering between joy and unease, as if he knew something he couldn't say. The tape's audio crackled to life, a low hum, like wind rushing through a hollow space. Then the mother suddenly snapped her head toward the camera, her wide eyes locking onto the lens. My stomach churned. She wasn't looking into the camera. She was looking at me. The screen abruptly went black. I leaned forward, waiting for the footage to resume, but the silence stretched on. Just as I was about to eject the tape, the screen lit up again. The room was empty now, the camera fixed on the couch. The eerie stillness was oppressive. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then, in the far corner of the frame, something shifted, a shadow, subtle but deliberate. My breath hitched as the shadow moved closer, taking the shape of a figure. It was tall, featureless, and impossibly dark, as if it absorbed all light around it. The figure stood motionless for a moment before it began to approach the camera. Its movements were slow but deliberate, each step accompanied by a faint creaking sound that seemed to echo in my living room. Then it raised a hand, long and skeletal, and pointed directly at the screen. My heart pounded as I realized it wasn't just pointing at the camera. It was pointing at me. Before I could react, the footage cut to another scene. This time, the camera was filming from a different angle, my living room at night. My blood ran cold as I saw myself on the screen, sitting on the couch, watching the tape. My on-screen self didn't notice the figure behind me. It stood just out of reach, its hand hovering inches from my shoulder. The tape cut to static, then silence. I yanked the tape out of the VCR and turned on every light in the house, my hands shaking. The sense of dread was suffocating, but I couldn't bring myself to leave the room. I checked every corner, every shadow, but there was nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next morning, I drove back to the yard sale to return the tape. But when I arrived, the house was abandoned. The lawn was overgrown, the windows boarded up, as if no one had lived there for years. I threw the tape into the nearest dumpster and vowed never to watch anything like it again. But even now, weeks later, I can't shake the feeling of being watched. Some nights, I hear faint creaking noises like footsteps, and when I turn around, I swear I catch a glimpse of a shadow retreating into the darkness. It was a strange day when I stumbled upon that mirror at the yard sale. Among the clutter of faded furniture, broken clocks, and tarnished silverware, this mirror stood out. Its ornate, gilded frame caught my eye from across the yard, glinting under the weak afternoon sun. It was large, larger than anything I had ever seen in a second-hand shop, and its intricate carvings of vines and flowers looked almost too delicate to be real. The glass, though slightly fogged with age, held a certain haunting beauty. I wasn't looking for a mirror, but I couldn't pull my gaze away. As I approached, I saw the vendor, a thin, hunched man with pale skin, watching me intently. His eyes darted nervously, and as I ran my fingers along the smooth surface of the frame, he cleared his throat. "That mirror, it's got a history," he said, his voice barely audible over the noise of the other shoppers. "It's been in the family for years. Just be careful with it." I laughed nervously, brushing off his comment as superstition. After all, it was just a mirror. How dangerous could it be? I asked him the price, and when he told me, I was shocked. It was almost too cheap for such a stunning piece. I paid him quickly, eager to get home and hang it in my living room. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man was watching me more closely than was normal. The moment I hung the mirror above the fireplace, it felt like something shifted in the room. The soft golden light from the late afternoon sun seemed to glimmer off the glass, almost as if the mirror was alive. I thought it was just my imagination, but it was like the room itself felt heavier. That night, after settling into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't the usual nighttime anxiety. This was something different. The house was quiet, but it was the kind of silence that felt like something was hiding in the shadows, waiting. I glanced over at the mirror, still reflecting the room's quiet stillness. That's when I noticed it. Something had changed. The reflection in the mirror wasn't quite right. At first, I thought it was just the angle or the dim lighting, but I swear, I saw a figure standing by the fireplace in the mirror. It wasn't anyone in the room with me. It was a woman, a dark silhouette, tall, draped in an old-fashioned gown, her long hair flowing over her shoulders. I blinked, and the figure vanished, but I could still feel her presence in the room. My heart pounded in my chest. I jumped up and rushed to the living room, but the room was empty. I turned the lights on, checked every corner, but there was no sign of anyone. I tried to tell myself it was just the flickering light playing tricks on my eyes, but deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The next few days were filled with strange occurrences. I would come home to find the mirror slightly tilted, as if someone had moved it, but I couldn't figure out how or why. At night, I heard whispers, low, unintelligible murmurs, coming from the direction of the living room. I would rush to check, but no one was there. Then one night it happened. I was sitting in the living room, the mirror hanging on the wall in my line of sight. The whispers began again, this time louder, almost desperate. I got up to investigate, but froze as I glanced into the mirror. There she was. The woman was standing just behind me. She was no longer a shadow. Her face was gaunt pale, with hollow eyes and lips twisted in an unnatural smile. Her hair fell in matted strands, covering parts of her face. I could see her breath fogging up the mirror as if she were standing right there, right next to me. I whipped around, but the room was empty. No one was there, yet I could still feel her presence. Cold. Overbearing. I bolted into the hallway and grabbed my phone, ready to call for help. But before I could dial, the doorbell rang. I opened the door cautiously, half expecting to see the vendor standing there, his eyes wide with some cryptic message. But it wasn't him. It was a figure, a man tall and unnervingly calm, standing in my doorway. He wore a long, dark coat, his face shadowed by the brim of a wide hat. "I see you found the mirror," he said, his voice low and strangely familiar. Before I could respond, he walked past me into the house, as if he belonged there. His eyes flicked toward the living room, where the mirror hung. "You should have listened," he muttered, his gaze locking on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You don't understand what it wants." I was frozen. The room felt suffocating as his words sank in, and suddenly the whispers intensified. I looked over my shoulder, but all I saw was the empty space behind me. Then, just as quickly as he had entered, the man turned and walked out without another word. I stood in the doorway, too stunned to move, my hands still gripping the phone. I couldn't take it anymore. That night, after everything that had happened, I decided to remove the mirror. But as I reached to take it down, I felt a cold rush of air behind me. My heart pounded in my chest. It wasn't the mirror. It wasn't the air. It was her presence, so close, I could almost hear her breathing. I yanked the mirror from the wall, and as it came loose, I felt something snap in the air, like the room itself was holding its breath. I covered the mirror with a heavy blanket and shoved it into my closet, but the feeling of being watched never left. The whispers continued, sometimes in the middle of the day, sometimes when I was alone at night. It felt like the mirror had left its mark on me, like I was carrying a piece of it inside my own mind. I went back to the yard sale to return the mirror, but when I arrived, the house was abandoned. It had been empty for years. The yard sale was gone. The vendor had vanished without a trace. The mirror is still in my closet, wrapped in layers of cloth. But sometimes, when the house is quiet and I'm alone, I swear I hear it. Whispers coming from the closet, faint but growing louder. And I know deep down it's not finished with me. I never expected a simple yard sale find to lead me down the path of complete terror. But that's exactly what happened when I bought an antique rocking chair. It was tucked away in the corner of the yard sale, almost as if it were trying to hide. The old wood had a faded, distressed look to it, and the faded velvet cushion seemed to call out to me in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't a chair I would have normally bought, but there was something about it, something that felt familiar. I could almost hear it creak, even before I touched it. The seller, a frail woman with tired eyes, didn't speak much. She just watched me as I inspected the chair, her hands twitching nervously by her sides. She gave me a strange smile when I asked about the price, but there was a glint in her eyes that unsettled me. It's been in my family for generations, she said in a low voice, almost too quiet for me to hear. Be careful with it. It's not just a chair. I thought she was just another eccentric old woman, caught up in her own superstitions, so I brushed off her warning. I paid her for the chair and brought it home, unaware that my life was about to change forever. From the moment the chair entered my home, strange things began happening. At first, it was small. I would leave the chair in the corner of my living room and find it slightly turned the next morning, as if someone had sat in it during the night. But that was easy to ignore. Maybe I had bumped it by accident, or maybe the dog had nudged it while running through the room. But then the rocking started. It was subtle at first, just a slight movement, almost imperceptible. But over the next few days, the chair seemed to begin rocking by itself. Back and forth. Back and forth. I would be sitting on the couch, watching TV, and I'd glance over to see the chair slowly rocking, as though it had a life of its own. I told myself it was nothing, that it was just the old wood shifting or the house settling. But something inside me told me it was more than that. The more I tried to ignore it, the more intense the rocking became. And then came the whispers. One night, as I sat in the living room, reading a book, the rocking chair began to move again. This time, the sound of creaking wood was accompanied by faint whispers, almost too low to make out. I froze, my eyes fixed on the chair. It was rocking steadily, as if someone was sitting in it. I had to force myself to get up and approach it, but as I did, the room grew colder. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. The whispers became louder, but they weren't words I could understand. It was as if the chair was calling to me, urging me to sit. Against my better judgment, I touched the armrest of the chair. The instant my fingers made contact, the temperature in the room dropped, and I felt a cold, clammy hand clasp around mine. My heart raced as I yanked my hand back, but the chair continued to rock. I tried to run, but my legs felt heavy, like I was moving through quicksand. The whispers escalated into desperate cries, and the air seemed to thicken. I turned to leave, but the door to the living room slammed shut, trapping me inside with the chair. In the dim light, I could make out something, a shape. A shadow sitting in the chair. The figure was barely visible, but I could feel its presence like a weight pressing down on my chest. It wasn't human. It was something darker. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, tight, and when I looked back at the chair, the figure was closer. It was as though it had moved, shifting with unnatural speed. I ran out of the living room, the door finally bursting open as I shoved it with all my strength. But when I turned to look back, the chair was gone. The whispers faded into silence, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. The chair didn't just vanish. It had left an impression on me. My house felt different after that night. Every time I passed the spot where the chair used to be, I could feel eyes on me. Cold, watching eyes. I decided to get rid of the chair. The next day, I took it to the local thrift store and left it there, hoping that whatever had come with it would stay behind. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. That night, I found the chair again. It was sitting in my living room, rocking gently in the dark. The whispers had returned, louder than ever. I tried to destroy it, to burn it, to break it, but no matter what I did, it always returned. I haven't been able to get rid of it. Every time I think I've finally gotten rid of the cursed chair, it reappears. And every night, the whispers grow louder, until I'm too terrified to sleep, too terrified to move. Now, the chair sits in my closet, hidden under a thick blanket. But I know it's just waiting, watching, and I'm not sure how much longer I can hide from it. By this point, I had grown cautious of yard sales, even avoiding them whenever possible. But something compelled me to attend one last sale. Maybe it was the haunting memories of the previous stories, or maybe I was just seeking closure. Either way, I found myself walking toward an old, weathered house on the edge of town, drawn in by the strange sign that read, "Everything must go. One day only." The sale seemed ordinary at first, vintage furniture, old books, random trinkets. I couldn't shake the feeling, though, that something wasn't right. The air around the house felt heavier than it should have, and there was a strange energy in the yard that I couldn't explain. But amidst the clutter, I saw something that caught my eye, a dusty, weathered photo album. It sat on a table, half hidden under a pile of books, as if someone had intentionally left it there for me to find. I opened it. The photos were all of a family, an older man and woman, and a group of children. At first, I thought they were just old black and white photos from a time long past. But then, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In every single photo, the family was posing inside the very house I stood in front of. There they were, smiling in the living room, in the kitchen, in the very yard where the sale was taking place. But something was off. The faces of the children, they looked strange. Their eyes were unnaturally dark, their expressions blank and vacant. I turned to the woman running the sale, an elderly woman with cold, lifeless eyes, and asked about the album. She smiled faintly, her lips curling into something more sinister than kind. "Ah, the photos. You found them," she said, her voice eerily soft. "Those children, they never left. They never did." I felt an uneasy shiver crawl down my spine. There was something she wasn't telling me. As I stood there, clutching the album, the atmosphere around me shifted. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally across the yard. The woman's smile faded as she stared at me, her eyes narrowing. "Be careful what you take from here," she warned. "Things don't leave this place. They just wait." I didn't know what she meant at the time, but I felt an overwhelming urge to leave, to drop the album and run. I turned to do just that, but as I moved, something caught my eye. In the back of the yard, near the edge of the trees, a shadow flickered. It wasn't a normal shadow, it was too solid, too defined. And it moved, stepping forward as if it was alive, coming toward me. My heart hammered in my chest as I took a few tentative steps back. The shadow grew larger, and I could make out the form of a child, dressed in old-fashioned clothing. It was one of the children from the photos, only now their eyes were wide open, black as coal, staring directly at me. I backed away slowly, but the child kept advancing, its feet dragging through the yard. The air grew colder, and the world around me seemed to quiet down, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Suddenly, the woman's voice broke the silence, louder this time, like a sharp command. "You shouldn't have taken it." And then the ground beneath me trembled, as if the earth itself was reacting to her words. The child stopped, its head tilting slightly, but I could feel the weight of its gaze burning into me. I could feel it getting closer, the pull of its presence stronger than ever. In a panic, I dropped the photo album and bolted from the yard, my legs feeling like jelly. I heard the woman's voice calling after me, but I dared not look back. The shadows in the yard seemed to reach out, pulling me toward the house. The chill in the air turned suffocating, and I could feel an invisible hand grasping at my clothes. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. Gasping for breath, I sped off, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. But even as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the child's eyes were still watching me, following me. When I got home, I checked my reflection in the mirror. My face was pale, my breath quick and shallow. But there was something else. In the reflection, just behind me, I saw a figure. A shadow. It was the same child from the photos. I turned around, but nothing was there. Since that day, I've avoided all yard sales. But sometimes, when I look into a dark corner of my room, I can still feel those black eyes watching me. And I wonder, will I ever truly escape the curse of the yard sale?